seats. We're going to get the program started. I'm Melissa O'Sullivan. I'd like to welcome you as Deputy Director of the Danube Institute on behalf of all of my colleagues at Danube. It takes a lot of people to make these events function smoothly, from the promotional folks, our media people, the videographers, the interns who will be in the room assisting with question time, the leadership of John O'Sullivan and Ishwan Kiss, and all the other folks, and our guests. If we don't have people who come with something interesting to say, there's no need for y'all to get out on a rainy, gross night. And speaking of y'all getting out on a rainy, gross night, thank you very much, because it would be no fun for our speakers if there wasn't a nice audience. So bravo, thank you, and welcome to the Danube Institute. Tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome Paul du Quenoy, who is the president and publisher of Academica Press. And he also is the founder and president of the Palm Beach Freedom Institute. Paul began his life as an academic. He received his PhD in history from Georgetown University and taught history, humanities, and the fine arts at Georgetown. But then that wasn't sufficient. And this crazy madcap intellectual decided he wanted to go to the American University in Cairo. And then that wasn't crazy enough, and he decided that he wanted to also go check out the American University of Beirut. He's twice been a Fulbright Scholar. He's held fellowships from the American Historical Association, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Kenan Institute for Advanced Russian Studies, which probably made things very nice with your Russian-born ballerina wife. He's... What? Oh, singer.
And California-born.
Oh, California-born.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, my apologies.
My wife's from the white Russian immigration.
Ah.
And also, as an official note, I only marry California girls. First wife was L.A., second was San Francisco.
Okay, I stand corrected. He met his Russian in California. All right. Where was I? The Andrew Mellon Foundation gave him a fellowship, and the Hokkaido University in Japan. His books include Stage Fright, Politics and the Performing Arts in Late Imperial Russia, 2009, Wagner and French Muse, Music, Society, and Nation in Modern France, Alexander Serov and the Birth of the Russian Modern. Through the Years with Prince Charming, the collected music criticisms of Paul du Quenoy, and Cancel Culture, Tales from the Front Lines. His writings have appeared in the New York Times, the New York Post, the Washington Times, the New Criterion, the Spectator, the Los Angeles Review of Books, the American Conservative, the European Conservative, City Journal, Tablet, Musical America, and numerous other publications. The night is not long enough to list them all. Paul, and you've heard some of the academic parts of Paul, but let me talk about the thing that makes Paul very interesting regarding our topic tonight, that being that of Florida conservatives. Paul is the most unusual of Americans because he's a Floridian who was actually born in Florida. And while he could have rested on his academic laurels, he chose to engage in the battle of ideas from outside of the classroom by his founding of the Palm Beach Freedom Institute, and also his morphing of this small, nice press left to him by his father that he's since come to turn into a publisher of very distinguished conservative books, such as that by John O'Sullivan, Sleepwalking into Wokeness, just out. Florida represents a very significant place in the U.S. Not only is it a major population center, being approximately number 3rd in the nation with some 21 million people in that one state. They're up to 23 now. This is an old stat. They have a very low unemployment rate, lower than the average for the U.S. as a whole. Their GDP rate at the end of 2023 was growing at 6% per annum. Historically a swing state, it is a swing state no more. And the stats that I have, which are dated, said that the Republicans had an advantage of over 1 million voters. The Democrats might want you to think it's in play, but it's not. It's solidly in the Republican wing, and that's a really good thing for we conservatives. And without further ado, I'm turning it over to Paul. He's going to discuss the topic in depth, and then John and I will engage with him in some conversation as well as you. So thank you very much. Please welcome Paul Duquesnoy, Dr. Paul Duquesnoy.
Thank you, Melissa, for that wonderful introduction. If I may make one small correction, I was actually not born in Florida.
Oh, bummer.
I was born in Rhode Island. I was born in Rhode Island, but I grew up largely, spent a lot of time in Florida, and now live there with my family. My mother, however, was born in South Carolina, which does make me Southern. If your mother's, it's like being Jewish. If your mother's Southern, you are Southern. Because otherwise, if your mother's a Yankee, she'll come down with her Yankee ways. And this is, even if you have the accent, it's not the same thing, right? So my mother was actually born in Beaufort, South Carolina. Yeah. And at school in the North, she was forced to lose her beautiful Charleston accent, which is like a crime against humanity. But enough about that. We're here to talk about Florida today, or as we call it recently, the free state of Florida. If you've been following American politics at any time in the last 6 years, Florida has become completely synonymous with the name of Ron DeSantis, our state's governor, who has had enormous success leading the state forward, as Melissa mentioned, economically, socially, and politically for the entire time of his governorship, such that he had achieved national and indeed even international popularity and ran for president, becoming arguably the Republican Party's second choice had Donald Trump chosen not to run for re-election this year. What we know more about Florida, however, is that traditionally it does have its own distinct brand of conservatism. 27 American states have Republican governors as of right now, and 23 of those states also have Republican legislatures. But there's only one state that has its own brand of conservatism. Have you ever heard of North Dakota conservatism? Or Alabama conservatism? No, of course not, right? It's a Florida thing. Maybe Texas in the 1980s, they have their own thing, but more and more what I hear from Texans is that they envy what we have in Florida because it's quite different. And what we have in Florida is a distinct brand of conservatism, which I would argue comes not only from the most recent past, from Governor DeSantis' administration, with all admiration for its and appreciation for its successes, but actually from the more remote history of Florida as a frontier area. We don't normally think of Florida that way today. If we talk about Florida, especially to an international audience, you'll hear about Disney World, beaches, vacations, travel and tourism, Miami. Where's Callum? He had his Florida suit on before. He didn't come. He had this white, Callum Nicholson, the director of research here, had a wonderful white linen suit today in honor of this talk, but I don't know what happened to him. That would be your image. But what I would submit to you is that, in fact, Florida is a frontier state. It was a place that became American largely because of frontier expansion. If you know the history of the state, this is something that we're now teaching to our school children. My son, who's in the 4th grade, has a social studies module called Florida Studies, of which we are immensely proud. If you follow Florida Studies back to the inception, you'll know that Florida was originally Spanish. St. Augustine is the oldest continually settled place in North America, a beautiful city still with its old Spanish fortifications, and remained a Spanish territory until 1820. The early career of Andrew Jackson, after he fought against the British in the Battle of New Orleans, was involved in fighting the Spanish in Florida as more and more Americans crossed that frontier from Georgia into Spanish territory and asserted themselves, much in the way that they would later do in Texas, which became American in the 1840s. Florida also became a state in 1845, but as a frontier area, this was very, very much a place where you would go as a new settler. And indeed, one thing we can mention, we often think of the Homestead Act of 1862 as a device to settle the Midwest. Right? Broad acreage would be available to you if you promised to settle on it. And this is free land, and work it for 5 years. It also applied to Florida. The original great estates of Palm Beach, the island community where I live, were homestead estates of 160 acres, most of which were later subdivided. So when you think about Mar-a-Lago or these fabulous places put up in the 1920s, most of which have now been demolished, the original land plots were homestead plots given to a very small number of people who came to our part of the world. How does that influence our conservatism? Well, I would say that frontier culture in Florida and generally in the United States and in other parts of the world gives you the most traditional and the most fundamental conservative values: self-reliance, rugged individualism, a distrust of central authority, all of the things that we say as conservatives we admire most in people, but very often in our modern world we're tempted to forget about. Florida has had this from its inception, and it continues to have it today. And you can say, well, it's been a swing state lately. Yeah, that's true. Florida has, until about, well, now, gone along with the party that won most presidential elections. In the last 40 years, there's only one exception to that. In 1992, the first President Bush won the state but lost re-election against Bill Clinton. Otherwise, the victorious party won the state in every election up until 2020, when Donald Trump won the state but was not successful in being elected back into the presidency. The trouble with looking at it that way, though, is that it ignores what I would argue that Florida is a small c conservative culture. Even when the Democrats dominated state government, these were what we used to call Dixiecrats. These were Democrats who were culturally conservative, people who, if they were alive today, would almost certainly be Republicans, and indeed, some of the ones who are still alive today became Republicans. Right? Our state government is now completely dominated, as we know, by the Republican Party, but the origins of that go back very deep in our culture and our sensibilities. Probably our most distinctive economic policy, everybody knows, and this is even internationally known, Florida does not have a state income tax. It's one of only 9 American states at present that does not charge an additional tax beyond your federal income tax. When was that passed? That became a law in 1924. In fact, it's not even a law, it's a constitutional amendment. And not only is it a constitutional amendment, it is the first amendment to the Florida Constitution, which was adopted in 1845. So this was under Democratic rule in the 1920s at a time when, very much like today, more and more settlers were moving into the state from the north and from other places. It was a huge land rush in the 1920s, but the state wanted to guarantee that innovators, that people creating businesses and opportunities would not suffer undue tax burdens from their state government. And the law, I should mention, the amendment applies not only to income but also to inheritance. That's also outlawed in Florida. There is no state inheritance tax. To give you an idea of scale, if you live in New York City currently, if you have that terrible misfortune, your top marginal tax rate when you calculate both New York State income tax and New York City's own income tax, New York City has a municipal income tax, if you can believe it, is 14.88%. I think California might outdo it next year and go to 16. Is that right? Yeah. But for right now, that is the highest tax rate in the United States. If you're a New Yorker paying that rate and you move to Florida, you automatically save an additional 15% of your income, which can be quite substantial, right? And looking at what you get in New York versus what you get in Florida, of course, the differences are tremendous. So it is that culture, I would submit, that has been more important in the buildup. Now, in the terms of actual partisan politics, again, we identify Florida as, we have this fashionable term, purple state. It can go blue or it can go red depending on the national trends. Now, I think it's more of a red state. Of course, it's more of a red state. But if you look at Florida in the 1990s, there were critical steps taken in that decade that led to our current success. The most important one, one that actually Florida's former Speaker of the House, Richard Corcoran, has imparted to me, was the adoption of term limits on state office. This is an immensely popular idea in the United States. It is favored by 87% of Americans at all levels of government. We have term limits for the presidency, initially by precedent because George Washington only served 2 terms, then in the 1950s by constitutional amendment, limiting the president to only 2 possible terms, 8 years. And also we have it in our local state government in Florida, adopted in 1992 for all state offices. We do not have it for Congress, despite the massive popularity. What does that mean in the Florida case? In Florida, up until 1992, state government was largely dominated by these traditional Democrats, these Dixiecrats I was talking about before, essentially conservative Democrats, many of whom would later become Republicans. But as the term limits took effect, it broke apart the powers of incumbency and saw a large number of those traditional politicians, this good old boy network that prevailed throughout the American South, collapse. In 1996, Florida elected a majority Republican legislature for the first time in over 100 years. We had Republican government right after the Civil War during the Reconstruction era, when the North essentially imposed Republican politicians on southern states. Again, one of the reasons why they had Democratic rule for so long. But within a very short period of time, the time-serving traditional Democrats were eliminated and replaced by a majority of Republicans. This also complemented the trend in national politics. We do not have term limits for Congress, but the congressional delegation that Florida sends to Washington became majority Republican in 1992. So we're already starting to see this substantial shift. And again, that's not particular to Florida. This is something that you'll see across the American South. States that had been solidly Democratic for about 100 years suddenly will flip in a very short period of time to becoming a solid Republican area. And if you look at the electoral maps in every presidential election, almost all of them become red states. You know, we have little questions about Virginia and Georgia and places like that, but these are it's the solid Republican South. We've had Republican governors since 1999. DeSantis was elected in 2018 very narrowly. He won by 32,000 votes, or 0.04%, I think it was. His opponent, the man who would have been our governor, Terry Gillum, had been the mayor of Tallahassee. He identifies as a democratic socialist and had a kind of unfortunate fate after he lost the election as governor, but we don't need to talk about that. But DeSantis did win, and I think it's important to mention, and the governor, to his credit, does say this in his memoir that was published during his presidential campaign. It was with the endorsement of Donald Trump. DeSantis had been a Florida congressman after serving as a naval officer for a number of years, and sought Trump's endorsement, which secured his election as in the Republican nomination process over Adam Putnam. Adam Putnam had been a congressman before. He was the state agriculture commissioner and very much the establishment candidate. The people of Florida, at least the Republicans in Florida, decided that the Republican establishment was something that no longer answered their concerns or represented their needs. So they went for DeSantis. Trump, who was president at the time, gave him his endorsement, lending him a significant amount of support that arguably, well, first of all, helped him win the nomination and then helped push him over the top in state politics. So what has happened in the intervening time is that DeSantis came in with a plan. He's a man of enormous principle. And if you follow his congressional career, he was standing up to special interests. He wrote, he said it multiple times, I did not go to Washington to make friends or to be part of the club or to socialize. I was there to effect positive change for my constituents and for the American people. As governor of Florida, he has been consistently doing this, both in terms of our economic growth and also the particular problems that came up after his election. The biggest one, of course, was the COVID-19 pandemic, which started just 2 years into his first term. We were already there in Florida. I had relocated from a position I held in Beirut, as Melissa was saying, In 2019, we were Floridians by choice, not by necessity. We had almost decided to go to New York, but Florida seemed like, for reasons I've described, seemed like a better option. The tax policies, the weather, the general sense of freedom. And under DeSantis' leadership, he followed a science-based approach. He opposed the national authorities who recommended severe lockdowns, the mass closure of institutions, the closure of schools, beaches, everything that makes a state great, right? He wanted to make sure that people were remaining in their jobs, that businesses stayed open. I'm personally grateful because my son is in 4th grade now, but he was in kindergarten then. He was live in school for 2 years instead of being under house arrest, which would have been the case had he gone, or near house arrest, which would have certainly been the case if he'd been in a blue state. So I certainly believe his health, his education, and the benefit of our family derives directly from that idea. Now, of course, the governor was severely criticized for this and for other policies, but he understands that. He's like, look, you're going to take heat if you take a bold position that's unpopular with the mass media. And his solution was simply to ignore that, to ignore the polls, to ignore what the media says. And the attacks are vicious. And to give another example, in our educational policies in the state, he has again been brutalized by the media. But nevertheless, U.S. News and World Report just came out with their annual rankings. Florida's education system is ranked the best of any state in America. Why is that? Well, because we have invested properly in our schools. We have built up from a point many decades ago where Florida was not so good in education, and created not only the best schools, but also the best state-run higher education. And we have in America both public and private universities. Florida public universities as a system are rated the best. The University of Florida, which is the flagship institution of that system, is a top 30 school. Was not the case when I was applying to college. Now it's about equal to Georgetown University, of which I'm a graduate. And it's a really wonderful place. Another initiative that the governor has taken up is to use institutional power, and this is, I think, a good comparison with what's happened here in Hungary, the institutional power that's available to him as governor to effect positive change and to implement conservative ideas. In his book, he describes the process of, he's a trained attorney himself, he's a graduate of Harvard Law School. He sat down with his staff and said, I want to figure out what we can do, what elements of the state government, of the laws and codes that govern Florida allow me to implement the plans that I would have. Every state has a different sort of form of government with different powers for the governor, but DeSantis, I think, did a very successful job of figuring out where he could act to implement positive change. This is generally true throughout the state government, in particular in our universities, appointing trustees who were mission aligned with what he wanted to do and with conservative principles in general has become something important that he's done. In 2023, he appointed a majority of the trustees of a small liberal arts college called the New College of Florida. It's a small liberal arts college, but it is part of the state university system. And there, the first thing they did, fire the president, appoint Richard Corcoran, who has written about this as the new president, and also start replacing undesirable elements of New College's curriculum. New College had become a radical left institution. They abolished the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. They abolished the Gender Studies program. And they wanted to hire not specifically conservative faculty members, but faculty members who would reflect a balance and a true diversity of thought. There's a canard that this is a conservative takeover, it's a hostile takeover, and again, the opposition to this has been enormous. It's national in scope. We're talking about a liberal arts college that has, I think, 700 students now, but it was denounced in the New York Times and the Washington Post. They have been filing lawsuits and regulatory actions against what Corcoran's doing at New College. The trustees who were appointed, the chairman of the board, I should say, is a member of my institute. She's a West Palm Beach attorney, Deborah Jenks, who's the chairman of the board of New College. They have had death threats. Chris Rufo, the conservative intellectual, who's another of the trustees, was spat upon in an apparent assault by one of the students. They have suffered mercilessly. And why? Think about it. They've changed policies at a small liberal arts college. This is enough to engender massive national opposition, probably millions of dollars in investment to oppose what's happening there, and total harassment. They feel very threatened. We were talking yesterday in the Danube Institute podcast that our so-called ruling elite, I resist that because I think it's more of an administrative managerial caste, is in fact deeply brittle. They're deeply insecure. They feel that their positions of power are easily threatened. And in the state of Florida, this is a leading part of what DeSantis is doing to them with success and with a significant amount of pushback. But nevertheless, he has made the state qualitatively better. When we look at the economics of Florida, I think that's another important thing. Melissa was talking about some of the statistics before, and good job with the research. I'll correct you again to say that the annual growth rate for the past 5 years has averaged 6.4%. Economic growth rate. Yeah, GDP. Yeah, by 6.4%. Our unemployment rate is half the national average. We are booming. I have a friend who is managing partner at Goldman Sachs and was given the job in 2020 of asking the asset management division in New York which of the associates would like to relocate to Florida. Every single hand in the room went up, and now they and Goldman and other important firms have opened major offices in Palm Beach, which seems to be developing as a new center of finance, recentering those relationships out of our, in print I always call it our fading northern capitals, away from New York. We see a similar phenomenon now in Miami with venture capital and also with tech and other forms of investment. Mayor Suarez, Francis Suarez, who's the Republican mayor of Miami, runs, I think, the best run municipality in America. It's actually an interesting story. I interviewed him recently. And during the pandemic, somebody posted an idea on Twitter. What if we moved Silicon Valley to Florida? Mayor Suarez saw the comment and wrote, "How can I help?" Since that has happened, millions of dollars have flown out of traditional tech areas in California, along with the people who work in those industries, as well as from around the world. Miami now has direct flights to Abu Dhabi, to Dubai, to Riyadh, to Doha, to centers in the Middle East that were never historically connected with Miami. Miami's orientation had been more toward Latin America. Those relationships remain, but that capital, that genius, those ideas are coming into the state. And again, all the benefits are there. I asked Mayor Suarez, what are the sources of your success? They're identical to what DeSantis would say. They're identical to what the early settlers of Florida would say. Low taxation, low regulation, law and order. All the things we need to succeed are here and not there. When we talk about the transplants, and again, we are up to 23 million people in the state, it's a moving target. So to include your daughter in Winter Park. Welcome to them. We have seen that huge population growth. One of our great fears was that the people coming in from the north, especially the biggest states feeding into Florida are now New York, New Jersey, Illinois, places that are traditionally Democratic in government. Our great fear was that they would all move down and start voting for Democrats and Democratic policies. Did they? Absolutely not. We actually have statistics on this. Among party, if you take the party registration of, we call these people New Floridians, by the way. Of New Floridians, they come down to Florida, it is 2-1 in favor of Republicans. So for every Democrat who moves, 2 Republicans come. And also independents. Now the other interesting phenomenon is what happens to the Democrats who do move to Florida? We don't chop them up and eat them, don't worry. What happens to them? Well, very often, they spend time in the state, decide that their old politics were wrong, and become not only New Floridians, but also New Republicans. We have only spotty data about this. I can give you the data from Palm Beach's congressional district, which is the 22nd district in Florida. The ratio of Democrats who switch to Republican in party registration is 7 times the number that go the opposite way. So for every Democrat who becomes, or for every Republican who becomes a Democrat in Florida, there are 7 Democrats who become Republicans. A lot of them are recent transplants who are out of environments in New York and Washington where they're simply not free to explore conservative ideas or to engage with the Republican Party for all sorts of fears. There are significant parts of our country today where if you say you are a supporter of Donald Trump, you will be fired from your job. Your friends won't talk to you. I've heard case after case of this. I had a friend who was up for an ambassadorship in the last Trump administration, was told by her neighbors in Washington, D.C. that if she accepted the ambassadorship, they would no longer speak to her. How do you remain a Republican? How do you be anything other than a Democrat clone in these environments? And you can go down the list and find even pettier examples. You'll be excluded from children's playgroups. You'll be thrown out of your book club. You'll be told you're no longer welcome at the co-op in McLean, Virginia, if you dare vote Republican or even express the slightest amount of sympathy outside of this dominant narrative that rules in our blue states. I wrote once in a column that it's a bit like looking over the Berlin Wall when we look from Florida back north. You have a heavily policed society that is maybe not policed in a law and order way, but policed for ideological conformity, and that if you should dissent from it, you will be in serious, serious trouble. Your life can be very unpleasant. In Florida, that's not true. You're not going to be chased out of a restaurant for expressing the wrong political views. You are not going to be punished administratively for being a Republican instead of a Democrat. You can walk around Palm Beach in a MAGA hat, and people will probably want to shake your hand. Yeah. The island, we should say that my town went 2/3 for Trump in both 2016 and 2020. We expect similar results in 24. So the Democrats who come tend to become Republicans, and the Republicans who come tend to be even more Republicans. That's even true for immigrants who are arriving in larger numbers. Much of the immigration to Florida is coming from places like, historically it was Cuba. Now we're seeing bigger communities from places like Venezuela, Colombia, Nicaragua. What are the politics of these people? The Democrats had long expected that Latin American immigrants would favor their policies for their reasons. And in fact, the opposite is true. Hispanics in Florida have been voting majority Republican in all recent elections. DeSantis won not just Hispanics as a whole, but every subdivision of Hispanics, including Mexicans and Puerto Ricans, who are the biggest Democratic Hispanic constituencies in America. He won them by absolute majorities, right? When he was reelected in 2022. Those communities, by the way, if you want to see the best political ads in the 2020 presidential campaign, the best political ads in Florida were the Spanish language ones. They were by far the most forceful, the most arguably belligerent against the Democrats. And you will find that these places are now voting Republican. Even Miami-Dade County, which is about 70% Hispanic by population and a traditional Democratic bastion, voted for DeSantis in 2022. In that year, he won, Florida has 67 counties, he won 62 of them. The Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel, which is located in Broward County, one of the 5 that did not vote for the governor, described it as a crimson hellscape. It's like red map of Florida, and they forced him to change it the next day to crimson landscape. But you get the idea of what this individual was thinking of. In practice, we've done really great numbers of reforms. I talked about jettisoning DEI from our public institutions. A big conservative principle that is nationally popular but rarely put into place is efficiency in government. Governor DeSantis has approved a number of laws through our state legislature to make sure that state government is more transparent, more responsive, and therefore less expensive. Florida's budget is significantly less than New York's, which has a smaller population. Nevertheless, if you look at our macroeconomic position, our state surfeit, we have a surplus in our state budget, is well over $20 billion. New York has a $20 billion debt. That's before you start adding in their projected expenses. I just saw that the redoing the entire New York City subway system is projected as a $68.5 billion job that they don't have the money for. They had estimated something like $51 billion a few years ago, but that's been overtaken apparently. So we were able to do that. And again, in another conservative principle, and this is something you rarely see, when you give tax money to a government, do you ever expect to get it back? Even if it is a conservative leading it? Ask anyone in the UK. Highest tax rates since the 1940s under a Tory government. How is this even, this is my big question for you, John. How is this even possible unless you're betraying your principles? What we've seen recently in Florida, not only do we have already very no state income tax and low corporate, the corporate rate's 5.5%. Florida, by the way, is routinely voted the best place to start a business in the United States. We are actually in the process of giving back money to our population. Governor DeSantis has cut taxes in certain categories. Sales and excise taxes on goods that are useful to families, for example, are being reduced. The corporate tax rate was slashed again in May. We've even cut, and this is something that's really astonishing considering the world of higher education now, we've actually cut tuition to our state universities. One of the wonderful things you can do, we have, and this is going back to the days of Governor Martinez, we have a marvelous plan called Florida Prepaid. This is a college savings program. Here's how it works. You purchase for your newborn child or very small child 4 years of college tuition at today's rate. And when he grows up, you're guaranteed that amount, which can be applied anywhere in the world to any institution you choose to go to in Florida or outside. When they cut the state tuition taxes this year, I got a check in the mail because when my son was 6, I wrote the check for the full 4 years, paid it off in one swoop, and the government gave back that difference, determining I had overpaid. How often does that happen? You don't get letters from that from the IRS very often, or from any other tax authority. But nevertheless, this is what we're doing in Florida. Another huge initiative that's been successful is the voucher program. School vouchers in the United States provide public money approximately equivalent to what the government would spend, the state government would spend per student for public education, and allow the parents to apply that in any environment they'd care to use. You can do this for a parochial school, a religious school, a private school, another public school, homeschooling, however you wish to approach it. In Florida, this was introduced some years ago on a very limited level for people at usually very low income people. But we are now one of only 6 states that has universal vouchers. So regardless of your family income, you can avail yourself of state money, even if you're a billionaire. Right? It doesn't matter. The principle is that this is your labor, this is tax that's been taken from you, and it will be restored to you to use as you see fit in the best interests of your child. Another area where DeSantis has had success is in election integrity. If you vote in Florida, you have to show a photo ID. Ballot harvesting, this process of sort of collecting ballots from communities, which is open to all sorts of corruption, is outlawed. You can't do that. In 2022, it may not surprise you to learn, when a national red tsunami was predicted in the United States in the midterm elections, it didn't really work in most places, but Florida actually had one. Right? We all presented our IDs to vote, voted for our candidates. Governor DeSantis was reelected with 19% over polling predictions that had been significantly lower. And Republicans won for the first time not just a majority of state offices, but all state offices at every level of state government. Right? And within our congressional delegation, both senators are Republicans. Every state has 2 senators. Both Florida senators are currently Republicans, as well as 20 of our 28 representatives in Congress. Right. This is the crimson landscape or hellscape, depending on your point of view, is what people see. And that election integrity is largely due to the DeSantis administration's emphasis on this. In contrast, earlier this week, the state of California passed a law outlawing the use of photo ID. Now, why would you want to do that? The only reason is to cheat in the election, right? Or to have unqualified people vote. The people who are not citizens, people who are perhaps not even alive, cast votes in the state election. And we can also note that pretty much every other country in the world has a photo ID requirement to cast a vote. And also, in another especially grating irony, a significant part of federal foreign aid to other countries provides millions of dollars to foreign governments who want to develop voter ID-based systems of elections. So we support it in other countries, but if you do it in America, it's a right-wing fascist coup, and usually also described as racist, for reasons that don't make any sense at all. We can also talk a bit about the policy, the new gender politics. DEI is eliminated. We also have passed very stringent laws against providing gender assignment surgeries to minors. This is against the law in our state. We passed an abortion law that limits abortion to the first 6 weeks of pregnancy only. And again, these are not entirely free of controversy. The media is over it. Lawsuits have been filed. We do have, within the spirit of the state, I think since it is basically a frontier culture, at least in origin, there's a good chance that the abortion restrictions will be loosened this year. We have 2 ballot initiatives that are very topical. One has to do with enshrining an abortion right in the state law. The other is to legalize personal marijuana use. And it looks like they're both going to pass. Like they have to pass with a supermajority of 60%, but there's especially the marijuana one, which actually President Trump has endorsed. Looks like he did. Looks like it'll pass. And again, there's a strong libertarian streak. It's not because they're rejecting conservatism. It's because they're embracing aspects of conservatism that are consistent with the state and its history. Where are we going in the future with this? The governor has said that Florida is where wokeness goes to die. This is shorthand for what's happening. I think one way to look at the future of Florida conservatism is to look at its opponents. What do opponents of the governor say? What do critics of Florida come out with in the media? And usually, they're very petty complaints. I don't think you're ever going to see a tide turned in Florida again, back to the Democrats, unless you can convince a majority of my fellow Florida residents that they would be better off with higher taxes, more regulation, less control over their children's educations, fundamentally unstable and potentially corruptible elections, and generally speaking, fewer rights, fewer opportunities, harder time starting businesses, and more impositions on their life by the government. Unless and until you can do that, Florida is and will remain not only a red state, but a free state. Thank you very much.
Well, that was the tour de force, Paul. You covered an enormous amount of territory. It all made perfect sense, and it's very. It points to some very interesting conclusions about the possible different futures of American politics. For the sake of argument, there, for the sake of, partisan balance, let me ask you this question: if Florida is, so to speak, the future of the conservative future of America, and of the Republican Party, what state best represents the democratic future of America, and why?
It's an excellent question. I would go with California. Yep. And we were talking about this a bit before. I think we have actual Californians in the audience today too, or former Californians. Yes. California is in many ways the opposite of Florida. It's a high tax state. It's a state where the government is very intrusive in imposing woke ideology. And what are their results? They have probably the worst economy of any big state in America. They have negative population growth last year for the first time in the history of the state of California. California became a state in 1848. It grew every single year up until very recently. The cities in California are cesspools. I don't use that term lightly. I have loved California in my life. I was last in San Francisco in June of 2023. Everything they say about it is true. If you walk around after dark, you will see mobs of people who are obviously mentally ill or on drugs. By court order, they cannot be detained or removed from the streets, unless, of course, the president of China is visiting and they don't want them to see them, which actually happened. A Potemkin village in America. Can you imagine that? Imagine it in San Francisco. It's dangerous. San Francisco's urban murder rate increased by 83% last year. Whereas in Florida, that's actually, I didn't talk as much as I should have about law and order. Florida has now the lowest crime rate it has ever had in its recorded history since we started doing crime statistics in the 1940s. It's the lowest ever. Even places like Miami, which have a certain reputation from the 1980s and Miami Vice and drug trade and all that, Miami has the lowest crime rate in its history. Mayor Suarez is extremely proud of this and should be. It's a fun and exciting place, fast-growing city. But California has all of these problems, economic, political, cultural, that Florida has solved. And of course, you could also argue that New York, in a way, is the opposite, because New York, as I said before, it has a budget deficit that is as high as Florida's budget surplus for a state that actually has fewer people. And what are the results there? Well, guess what? In the last census, we do a census every 10 years. New York lost so many people that it lost a congressional district, while Florida gained one. Congressional districts are apportioned by population. They lost one, we got one. Illinois lost one, we got one. California lost one, we got one. Yeah. Right? So you see this movement of people, this movement of capital, something like $100 billion in adjusted gross income left New York State for Florida and 3 or 4 other states that picked up that movement. If you have any kind of fortune, any kind of generational wealth, you are much better off moving to Florida. A lot of my friends in Palm Beach are former New Yorkers I didn't expect to see very much when we moved back. Now I see them all the time, play golf, have lunch, and they're happy new Floridians who are quite pleased. And it's a phenomenon in Palm Beach. You'll sit around in restaurants, eavesdropping on conversations, hearing people in outer borough accents congratulating each other on their escapes from the horror that they had in the Northeast. And very often, something I encounter when hearing these stories of people who have moved down, a lot of these people have joined the Palm Beach Freedom Institute. They're our proud members as new Floridians. They almost always have some kind of blue state horror story about crime or being harassed by the government or being unduly investigated by tax authorities, or some way in which they were victimized or aggrieved by their lives in a blue state. So we welcome that.
I have an obvious follow-up, however, to that question. And the follow-up is this. I agree with you, by the way. California is the perfect example. And just as New York is a contender for that, Texas is a contender for the Republican success. But if we'd been talking in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, I think the question we asked you at the very beginning, you would have said California was the conservative future of America. And I wonder how you can perhaps explain California went in the negative direction it went in, despite, and some would say immigration, but immigration has certainly had a big impact on California, but surely an equally big impact on Florida, but with different political outcomes.
Well, what I would say is this, and this is not only true for California, but also for a lot of blue states, is that liberals in America have, in recent decades, done what we're only starting to do as conservatives in America. They use the instruments of state power to entrench themselves in government. A recent example of that was the changes in voting laws because of the pandemic. In 2020, they said, okay, well, you can have ballot harvesting, we can have more generous absentee ballots, you can do more mail-in ballots, you can mail your ballot voting. I'll tell you a personal story. I did my education in Washington, D.C. I have not lived there on any regular basis since 2005. I still receive a Washington, D.C. absentee ballot in the mail every year.
And I assure you, someone's voting in your place.
No, I tear it up.
No, I'm saying someone is taking your place and voting in your stead. That's one way you cheat.
Is that how Haley won the primary?
I don't know about that. I just know that's a way. Absentee ballot.
I could, with no consequences, vote in both Florida and Washington, D.C., because there's no way they could ever track me down. But I tear up my Washington, D.C. ballot and vote in Florida like a responsible citizen. But nevertheless, this is what they do. Those COVID era laws in the blue states have remained permanently on the books and were never put back to their original restrictions. And of course, if you even suggest voter ID, then you get all kinds of problems.
But that's you've talked about immigration and voter fraud there. But are there no other big trends that explain California's negative direction? Because after all, when you and it's true, when you look around America and around the world, the Democrats when you have a strong Democratic control of the state, you get an increase in social problems and you get economic decline. You would think that everybody would look at their neighbors and reach the conclusion, well, they do to the extent that they move to Florida and out of California, and they move to Texas and out of California, and they'd move out of New York. Why don't they draw political conclusions unless it's the deadbeats who remain and they vote for the Democrats?
Well, the trouble here, John, is that you were under as I mentioned, such enormous pressure to conform. Yeah. And I think that another answer to your question is groupthink, especially in the cities and the urban areas of New York and California. If you step out of that box of liberalism, and Manhattan votes 85% Democratic. Is that because everyone in Manhattan is a progressive leftist? No, I think a lot of them aren't. But they go along because they think this is the correct thing to do. There's also a significant amount of media bias. If you follow the mainstream media in the United States, or as we call it in Florida, the regime media, will tell you that everything's fine, that crime rates are down, that California is full of beautiful cities and happy people. And there are individuals who believe this. Even the conservative legacy press is very reluctant to admit that there are significant problems in our country. When I started the Palm Beach Freedom Institute in 2021, I had a minor acquaintance with the opinion editor of the Wall Street Journal and wanted to announce the Institute in the pages of the Wall Street. I thought that would be a good thing to do. It's a solid conservative publication. I'm a journal subscriber myself. I read it every day. Wouldn't that be a great place to announce the Institute? I get a note back saying, Paul, I think it's too belligerent, and I don't think you come across well. So guess what I did? I sent it to Newsmax, Chris Ruddy at Newsmax, headquartered and incorporated in Boca Raton, Florida. And they said, well, we'd be delighted to publish this. And wow, would you also like to have a column on our website? I said, sure, and named it Florida Man. And even the legacy conservative outlets like the Wall Street Journal and embarrassed as National Review are reluctant to offer any serious criticism of the prevailing order. So
Speaking of Florida Man, we have a Florida man on the front row, George Loringer, part-time resident of Budapest, part-time resident of Sarasota, Florida, and very active in the Republican Party at the national committee level, I believe. All right. And then in the back of the room, we have Daniel Whitehead, Esquire, who serves in the Attorney General's, counsel to Ron DeSantis, the governor. And he was involved in the battles, advising for some of the great ways in which Governor DeSantis has taken these conservative goals and ideas and dreams that we conservatives aspire to and actually turned it into action at the executive level and at the I'm starting to say parliamentary level, the state congressional level. And are there any other Floridians in here I'm not aware of? Ah, please. And what is your name, sir?
Sometime resident of West Palm Beach.
Boris. Hello, Boris. Welcome very much. Now, I have one quick question. You were talking about the people moving from some of the blue states. What's the status of the Florida pension funds? Because I know that is a real concern that many people, you know, anyone has to be concerned that the firefighters in a city like New York, is their pension plan funded?
Yeah, as far as I understand, our pension plans are doing very well. And again, this goes along with the general economic success of the state. Not only are we able, as I mentioned, to provide significant services, we're also able even to give money back. And contrary to any problem with it, a significant trend among those people who are moving down from blue states are police officers, firefighters, first responders, and other people who would join our state pension plan. Teachers as well. We did, when we were considering moving to New York, we actually did the whole Manhattan preschool thing, which it's daunting until you realize they don't care about your child, they're interviewing you. Once you realize that, you can ace it. Some of the teachers from the very schools where we applied to put my son as a preschooler are now living in Florida, teaching at his current school in Palm Beach, which I'm proud to say has no diversity, equity, or inclusion components. And again, they're, since it's a private school, they're not under state law, but they just choose not to, because if they did, about 80% of the parents would riot, and then there'd be no more school. Yeah, so you're actually seeing these people move down. About 20% of the Palm Beach town police force is former New York Police Department. And why is that? They're in an environment where they're respected, where they can operate with within the law, but with the full force of the law, where they're not going to be called racist or attacked simply because they're police. In New York, we've had many unfortunate incidents of police officers being attacked by criminals. And it's a place where you can actually defend yourself. And I think that this is actually another important point about the law and order. We have stand your ground laws, and now we have permitless carry of firearms.
Would you explain what stand your ground law means for a European audience?
It would be unfamiliar, I think, to a European audience to say what a stand your ground law is. This means simply that you can defend yourself against criminals. If your home is invaded, if you are in danger, if your family or other people are in danger, you can use lethal force to stop that from happening. And that this is perfectly within the law. Palm Beach has not had a murder since 1996. In significant part because you never know who else is armed, and as we like to say, an armed society is a polite society. I will, however, give you a recent case. One of the problems of South Florida, particularly now, I think a consequence of our popularity and success, is that we now have rising traffic. So you have more incidents of road rage. And again, the last murder in Palm Beach was so long ago that the victim was killed with her own landline telephone cord. And when was the last time you had a landline telephone cord in your house? That's how long it was. But we did have a shooting incident in February. It was a car trying to pass another car that was in the way. Somebody gave somebody the finger. One guy brandished his firearm and pointed it at the other driver. The second driver took his gun out and shot at him, blew out his window. Which one gets arrested? The guy who fired the shot or the guy who just pointed the gun? The guy who pointed the gun is the one who gets arrested. Because he has engaged in aggravated assault without intent to kill. So there were 3 people in the other car. He was arrested on 3 counts of that. The man who fired the shot and shattered the other car's window, he was free to go. They didn't even detain him. But that's about the closest we've come to crime. But this is a digression from your question, but it's a serious issue.
Let me ask you a question now about a couple of the cities. The first one I'm going to ask about is Miami. Miami is one of the most unusual cities in America. First of all, it's in addition to being an American city, is also the capital of Latin America. There are a lot of people living there who move back and forth between Latin America and Miami, and quite a lot of business comes in and out as well. That's one thing. The second is it has a large number of Cubans who are an unusual, distinctive sort of Latin American, and they are one of the stable centers of Republican support, or have been until recently. And it is also a city which Tom Wolfe, in his last book, Tom, of course, being the great Tom Wolfe, being one of the most acute social observers in American literature, he wrote a novel called Miami, and based upon it, looking at all the different and extremely varied social classes and groups in the city. And of course, if you take the view, which is common, that in American politics demography is destiny, you would expect certain kinds of results from that. I don't think that those results I might expect are borne out by what your view of Miami, but let me hear your view of Miami.
Well, again, I think if you buy this argument, demography is destiny, it's a very complicated expression, John, because the destiny is something that is turning out to be very different from what they expected. And it's true that Miami is predominantly Hispanic. Miami-Dade County is 70% identifying as Hispanic. But again, DeSantis won it with an absolute majority in his re-election campaign in 22. It's a hotbed of Trump supporters. There have been some shifts. In fact, I think in 2012, Obama only narrowly lost the Cuban community to Romney that year. And there were predictions that, well, the Cubans have been here for 2 generations now, and as they become more and more Americanized, the sort of particularities of Cuban politics will fade. This turned out to be a false prediction. The Cubans are now back strongly in the Republican camp, along with all other categories of Hispanics, including the ones that had been solidly Democratic for a long time. And it's easy to see why. They're Catholics, and if you go to Catholic Latin Americans and say, "Oh, what do you think about transgender ideology?" they're going to look at you like you're out of your goddamn mind, and rightly so. But again, a lot of what the Democratic Party believes today is not what it would have believed 20 or even 10 years ago, and it strikes them as something that's completely unacceptable to their view of the world. And again, the communities are being joined, not only Cubans, but also if you're talking about Venezuela, which has its own mess under Maduro and previously Chavez, that community, Nicaraguans, Colombians, people who have actually lived under socialism will come and tell their American neighbors, don't vote for this. The reason we're here is because of these communist bastards in our home countries, and we don't want that to happen in our new country. We've come here for that reason. So it has become a shift. And again, if you remember, Mayor Suarez's father was actually the Democratic mayor of Miami in the 1980s. His son grows up to succeed him as mayor, effectively, and he's a Republican. Not just a Republican, but a Republican who has now endorsed Donald Trump this year.
The second city is your hometown, Palm Beach.
Yeah, that really is peculiar.
Yeah. Now, Palm Beach. If you read, everyone here, some people here may have read Pat Buchanan's memoirs of his early life, right from the beginning, a book which was a bestseller and also was much enjoyed and admired by people on the left as well as the right. I mean, it's a good, readable book.
John, please explain to a younger audience who Pat Buchanan is.
Pat Buchanan is the leader of the populist right in America from the end of the Cold War until he is effectively, in the last couple of years, retired. And he was also a best-selling, who's a leading American columnist. And I know him in part because I was the editor of an editorial page for which he wrote regularly. And it was one of the most popular columns, but it particularly with blue-collar readers. But the other thing I was going to say was that here's a passage about going down from Washington. And he's from, father was an accountant, he's from a prosperous middle-class family in Washington. And he and his brothers go down to a wedding in Palm Beach. And as they arrive in the outskirts and drive into the city, they are completely astonished by the manicured lawns, the succession of beautiful houses. In every respect, this is a city which is, I would say, an upper middle class paradise of a particular American kind. And they had never seen anything like it. And these were kids from a middle class suburb. Now, Pat got some return on that book, because he did quite well when he ran for president in Palm Beach, I think. At least I was told so. But my question really is this. Palm Beach is probably also the home of the donor class for the Republican Party. That's one thing. It funds campaigns. And secondly, it is very much an upper-class American enclave, and yet it's completely different, it seems to me, from the modern American upper class, even though, of course, individual members are of that class. How do you explain this extraordinary city?
Yeah, I think, again, since we're talking about Florida today, the obvious analog on the left side would be Martha's Vineyard. Yeah. Martha's Vineyard, which voted 78% for Biden, and germane to our story, because when we were having this sanctuary city business, Governor DeSantis outlawed the concept in the state of Florida, and to prove a point, sent 50 Venezuelan migrants on a charter flight to Martha's Vineyard to see how the population there would react. Guess what the liberals in Martha's Vineyard did? They called in the National Guard and had them removed, and sent them to an army base on Cape Cod. Right, so this was an act of utter hypocrisy. And why would I explain this? I think Palm Beach, first of all, Florida does draw more conservatives than it traditionally has. But also Palm Beach itself is a place where you can go and not be judged in that way. So donor class individuals who fear nothing. I can speak only for myself, but I am not professionally cancelable in any way. Like, they can come at me with anything they want. There is literally nothing they can do to me on a cultural or professional level that would harm my life. Right? This is a microcosm, just one individual among about 9,000, and we're not even a city, technically we're a town residents who are vaguely in sympathy with that. You do get differences of opinion over which Republican candidate to support. The donor class, some of them were leaning toward Haley recently. The people who were leaning toward Haley were largely New York finance people who were plugged into that network, and it needs to be said, whose wives didn't like Donald Trump. Right? So there's that. Oppressed businessmen such as myself, however, were more on the Trump side, and we did vote for Trump by about 63% in both of his elections. And again, it's a town, I think, also where those differences are respected, where privacy is at a premium. We used to say in the pandemic, we didn't mind social distancing because we invented social distancing. We all live behind high hedges, and if you approach Palm Beach Palm Beach is an island. If you come from the landward side, there are no signs indicating where it is. Like, you might see a sign for the beaches or A1A, the coastal highway, but there is no sign that will direct you to Palm Beach. Right? This is not a place that you wanted to advertise your place. So I think that discretion also attracts people who don't want to be bothered by the government. One of the more resonant lines in the presidential debate between Trump and Kamala Harris last month was when Kamala Harris said, and very, very seriously said, Donald Trump has no plan for you. The Palm Beach reaction was, oh, good. I don't want the government to have a plan for me. The last thing I would want. So we that I think would sum up the ethos of the place. But we have maintained that. And I think also, and again, this is another reason, like we're talking about, why is California so blue? Why is New York so blue? a lot of liberals come to Palm Beach, and guess what? They just don't feel comfortable. I'll give you the great pandemic example. Even while CNN was broadcasting basically lies about DeSantis and his administration, one of their top anchors at the time, Don Lemon, who was subsequently fired by CNN for being too biased, used to come and spend time at the pool at the Colony Hotel in Palm Beach, an iconic property there. Some lady saw him there lounging by the pool, not wearing a mask. Phone comes out. Hey, Don Lemon, where's your mask? Why aren't you wearing a mask? How come you're on television telling us our state's shit and you're not wearing a mask? What does he do? How does he react? Gets up and runs away. This is actually captured on a cell phone video that was then posted on Twitter for millions of people to see. So if you fall out of our approach, then it's not a great place to be. I have a friend in Washington, D.C., who has been to visit me a couple of times. He has told me that he doesn't really want to come back because he cannot discuss his visits with his friends in Washington without feeling severely judged because he's visiting a conservative enclave.
I think we should go over the questions, but I have one very last question from this side. Does Florida have an equivalent to Silicon Valley? You mentioned the general prosperity, but does it have an equivalent to Silicon Valley? And if so, in what industry?
We're building up artificial intelligence and the very cutting edge sort of information technologies in Miami now. And that's, as I mentioned, a Suarez initiative. When the idea was floated, almost as idle discussion, he seized onto that. And as he put it to me, he said, I want to lean into that innovation. So I want to welcome innovators from Silicon Valley to come in. So you see the venture capital that is necessary for that. Remember, Silicon Valley, it's not just technology, it's also this amalgamation of capital that invests in it. The VC markets for information technology are increasingly building in Miami. I have students who are with me at the American University of Beirut who turn up in Florida and say, hey, I'm here looking to fundraise for my new tech initiative. Let's go out. Right. So in addition to being a fun place to be, it's also a place where you can come to succeed in business. And that's not just true in America or Florida, it's true globally. Like this is becoming a massive phenomenon.
Thank you. Now, yes?
Our first question will be the gentleman in the back who's been working as general counsel to Governor DeSantis.
Hello. Is it working?
Yeah.
Excellent. Daniel Whitehead, I was legal counsel to Governor DeSantis for 2 years. Now I'm here in Budapest. Thank you for all the great comments about the state. We appreciate it very much. I guess my sort of question here is, Florida government is, I would say, extremely effective at accomplishing what we're doing because we're moving away from an older mode of what I guess you could call conservative thought, which was the sort of idea that the government is not supposed to do anything and it's supposed to just let private individuals sort everything out, while the left is simultaneously using every single institutional support it can find, private and governmental, to accomplish its ends. So in the state government, we actually have, when the governor sort of became a rising star, a number of, I would describe as sort of paleo-conservative, heavyweight, very intelligent, sophisticated attorneys and policy people come to the state and, I don't want to say weaponize, but use the tools at our disposal to, I would say, eliminate leftist ideology in every conceivable way we could, from education to business to health standards. So I would just ask you to comment on your sort of thoughts on the transition from this, I would describe it as a right liberal mode of government to this sort of post-liberal sort of mindset, and maybe describe why you think pretty much no other state, except for arguably Texas, has. Why are they not sort of going in this direction?
Yeah, I think that the split is something we noticed when we created the Institute. Even before we had formally announced anything, I was getting phone calls and emails from very well-mannered and extremely polite Washington, D.C. conservatives, some New York conservatives, telling me exactly what they thought the Palm Beach Freedom Institute should do and in what ways it could help them. So this was a part of it. I think that's a big split and something that Governor DeSantis writes about in his book. He says, like, the traditional GOP establishment is simply not responsive to its electoral base. We want to be responsive to our electoral base. We're not afraid to be. We don't depend on the North for anything. We don't need the lobbyists. We don't need the K Street thing. We don't need to go to those parties. I don't need the cocktail party invitations. That was the major difference. And in a lot of states, again, I mentioned before, we have 27 Republican governors, but only one Florida, and only one brand of state-level conservatism. What does that do? When you're in the hands of the traditional conservatives, it's this Reagan idea that essentially you just have to deal with the economy, cut taxes, and everything else will be okay. Now, the fundamental flaw of that approach was that it ceded cultural, social, and intellectual life and education to the radical left for 2 generations. And we still hear this today. If you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which I still do, and what they're telling us is that, well, we need to go back to something like that, even though all they offered was 50 years of catastrophic defeat. They shouldn't be listened to anymore. They're yesterday's men. They're totally irrelevant, in my opinion. And I think they look at Florida with trepidation because it means their ideas are being displaced, and rather a lot of resentment because nobody listens to them anymore. And I think that this is why you have people like Bill Kristol who have now become Democrats after a long time, before his magazine was stabbed in the front by its own, its own publisher, and that was quite a scandal. So you have these people who are, I would use the word cowards, afraid to use the authority that they have for fear of being called names or having an unpleasant life, who have become, in fact, a controlled opposition. And I use that term because we're in Eastern Europe, where the idea of controlled opposition comes directly out of the Cold War. You could be a non-communist, but as long as you didn't mess with the prevailing regime, you could live some kind of decent life. A lot of American conservatives, especially in the older generation, have deliberately chosen that path. And the rewards are, let's be honest, significant. You can be a David French and become a New York Times columnist and get paid God knows how much money to do that. And your speaking fees as a New York Times columnist are going to be a lot higher than they are as a Newsmax columnist. So the temptation's there. And I think resisting that temptation is something that's unique to our state. And I'm very happy that you're here and very, very grateful for your work in doing that, because I do believe this is the successful model. We are seeing some of the Texans coming over in that direction, and places like Alabama, Oklahoma, Idaho, they are starting to introduce similar types of legislation and reforms in their institutions as well. So I think this is something that will catch on, and I do think this is the wave of the future. What the governor's role in that will be is something I can't speak to, but there are certainly enough admirers and acolytes that it will survive as a movement. And I would say that within the Trump camp, within the MAGA movement, this is something that's also very much shared and admired.
Next question, lady here in the second row.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for this excellent presentation, and honestly, I'm really learning a lot. I come from Egypt. My name is Mona, and my field is strategic thinking and strategic planning. So I have few points and then a question. And the points are just briefly: attacks on Trump, depths of United States, freedom of speech, the integrity of the elections, how can we make sure, gender surgeries and abortion problems leading to hypocrisy, Then my question, but please, all those points are important to mention. My question here, the gap is getting really big. Maybe the Democrats and the Republicans share the same values regarding foreign policies. But we can see from our point of view in the Middle East, domestically, the gap is getting really very big. And this proves why each state has its own preference. So if we say California, I was in California last March in LA, Beverly Hills, because we were going to shoot something. As I'm a novelist, so we were planning to do something in Hollywood. We couldn't even reach Hollywood because that time it was the film festival and there were demonstrations against Israel and then against the attack of Palestinians and Hamas, and it was a mess. So we could see the gap in values is really getting huge between the Republicans and the Democrats, leading to each state refers to a president. So as a strategist myself, because my field is strategic thinking, do you think that one day we're going to see the United States having each state on its own, with its own domestic politics, own domestic values? I'm talking about years ahead as a strategist, because I see really that the Florida people are totally different than the LA people, the California people, the New Yorkers, because I've been to all those cities, by the way, so I could see this guy is not comfortable in the state. So expectedly in the future, as a futuristic person, don't you think that each state has its own right to choose its own president, not a mayor, but its own person? And this is what we expect in the future to happen to the United States, because I don't see it united anymore. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, of course, we have an ugly history of states trying to secede from the Union with pretty bad results. The latest figure I saw is that more than 40% of Americans believe there'll be a civil war in the next few years. Not a majority, but a significant percentage. And we have, it's in the national discourse, talk of a national divorce. I personally wouldn't favor that, a breakup of the Union. I think that I agree with, as a son of the South, I reluctantly say Abraham Lincoln said the house divided against itself cannot stand. So I think there does have to be national unity. And what I see is that the divisions could be overcome either by a cataclysmic event or just by doing our work, demonstrating our success, and letting people draw the natural conclusions. And I think part of the Florida story isn't just that we have a great system in Florida or a nice life in Florida, it's that we are providing examples for other states and for people who are seeing those levels of success. And at the very high levels, especially in economic life, the recent ideological conversions of people like Elon Musk, who has gone from more or less a Democratic, kind of centrist Democratic voter to being a Trump Republican, right? They are seeing really meaningful differences based on evidence, based on objectivity, based on things that they can observe happening in their lives, in their businesses, in the country, that favor our side of view. So I would say, rather than encourage the division, show good examples, make rational arguments. And I think this is not only true for the United States, I think this is also true for the European Union. You know, Hungary is under immense assault for having its own policies, particularly now on migration. But if you can show success, and looking around Budapest, when I first started coming to Budapest, honestly, it looked a lot more like Russia. Today, it looks a lot more like Germany, only better. And the streets are clean. You don't see levels of crime like you're starting to see in Western Europe. Lead by that positive example. Give people something good to look at. Give people evidence rather than emotion. And gradually they'll come over to your view. And I think it's important to note that in the current American presidential election, the country is more or less divided between the two candidates, despite the enormous, I wouldn't say problem, but the enormous challenges that Trump has faced resurrecting his candidacy and going through this multiple prosecutions on often very not particularly strong grounds. Nevertheless, tens of millions of Americans still support him all over the country, and you can find people who are covert supporters in blue states. It's very rare that you would find covert liberals in Florida.
Dr. Zaki, I used to entertain this thought that you expressed, but then the more I thought about it, I was reminded that a man named Rudy Giuliani became mayor in New York City. And I do think when the pain gets bad enough, people are going to flip and stop voting for the Democrats. And I think this is why you are hearing the sounds, shall we call it a dog whistle? When I hear Hillary Clinton on the U.S. side of the Atlantic and Tony Blair on the other side of the Atlantic both call for censorship, when the New York Times has a front page, is it New York Times or New Yorker? The New Yorker, saying that the U.S. Constitution, well anyway, the U.S. Constitution could be dangerous.
The New Yorker this week says that the Constitution, it says that the New Yorker story this week is that the Constitution should be torched, and the New York Times has in the recent past published op-eds against free speech and also against the Constitution. Now that does, and the expression we use for this on the populist right is red pill, like in the Matrix. That's what wakes people up. If you read Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk, actually documents why he bought Twitter, and it was because he had a son who transitioned into a daughter by a school that he trusted and by medical experts that he said he had faith in when he signed the papers saying, yeah, give him puberty blockers if this is what he needs to do, not realizing what that really meant. And for this reason, he became aware that there are much larger problems in our society, to the point where he spent billions of his own dollars to buy Twitter, and then not only buy it, but also expose its collusion with the FBI and the security agencies, which was documented in all of the Twitter files that he acquired as the new owner and publicly released to almost no media coverage, and also to establish it as a true free speech platform where political speech would no longer be censored, which it very much was prior to his acquisition.
I think the whole point of federalism, of course, is to provide the opportunity for different parts of the country, different parts of society, to pursue slightly different ways of life. I think that I don't think it's John Stuart Mill. It might be experiments in living is one of the kind of ideas underlying federalism, and I think it should work in the sense that it gives a society greater flexibility in dealing with different points of view. And now we're passing laws about abortion, in which case if you don't want to live in a state that has liberal abortion laws, you can move to another one and vice versa. But what threatens this, not simply in America, I think, but worldwide, is the new kind of left-wingery, which we call wokeism, but which is in principle hostile to other opinions because it regards them as defenses for oppressive government. This is nonsense, and it can be shown to be nonsense, but it's powerfully embedded in young people who've been indoctrinated at universities, and they are taught what they call critical thinking, but is in fact a complete inability to think critically. So, I mean, there's lots going on here, not confined to America, and it's something we're talking about all the time. I think we may have time for one more question. Oh, two. Well, let's get the two questions together.
So, thank you very much. My name is Tomasz Żywaczewski. I am a visiting fellow from Poland. So I'd like to ask about promptly about two things following up the previous remarks. So first, do you think that Florida can be like the power horse for the new trends in Republican Party? You mentioned about this post-liberal way of thinking. So do you think that Florida can pave the way for Republican parties in other states? Because I know that there are pretty big differences between Republicans in different states. And the second, my question is about this wokeism. And of course, we know that we talk about a huge division in the US, but it's quite similar to what's happening to other European countries, also to my homeland. However, what I am observing is that actually, it is very often I get the feeling that for me it's easier to communicate with my American conservative friends, with my fellow Polish people who are leftist. Even though we had a totally different cultural, maybe not cultural, but historical, national, linguistic background, still I feel more familiar and close to my American conservative friend than to my Polish, let's say, acquaintances or friends who are liberal. So there is this process that within the entire Western sphere of civilization, besides the borders, there is some kind of this division. And how do you think it can, in a broader terms, affect the US society? And if we can find a way to try to somehow make this division between the societies and that cuts the Western civilization not so severe.
Sure. I think Florida
Thank
will.
you very much.
Yeah, I think Florida will play a very leading role because just the sheer human capital on the American right that has moved into the state is enormous. And in addition to the economic advantages, the idea that you are free to express yourself as a conservative has brought down a huge number of conservative intellectuals who are doing things like establishing freedom institutes and doing their media work or whatever it is they're engaged in from Florida. So in that sense, it definitely is a bastion. And also, it is an alternative. If you don't want to be in the New York and Washington conservative circles, which are, sad to say, not particularly active in the current politics, Florida is the natural place. I'll do another digression. I was at a university club function in New York earlier this year, and they were talking about crime. This is about 300 right-wing New Yorkers meeting in downtown Manhattan, 54th Street in Manhattan, talking about crime in their city. And one of our initiatives at the Freedom Institute last year was to do fundraising for the legal expenses of an American veteran called Daniel Penny, who was on a New York City subway, one stop away from my place in New York. He was at West 4th Street, where a crazy man was engaging in a crime under New York State statute, which is called menacing, essentially threatening people on the subway. This former soldier very bravely approached the guy and, having been trained to how to restrain violent people, put him into a chokehold. And in the process of doing this, the man unfortunately suffocated. Daniel Penny was not celebrated by New York authorities for defending himself or his fellow passengers. He was placed under arrest and charged with manslaughter. He's going to trial actually next week. And we heard about this. His lawyer, Tom Kenneth, who is a wonderful guy, himself a veteran, contacted me and said, well, Daniel's 24 years old, he's a veteran, he doesn't have any money. A private defense to defend a manslaughter charge in New York now is about $1.5 million. So can you help us raise funds? We have $12,000 in something called Give, Send, Go. This is a great alternative to GoFundMe. GoFundMe charges a fee and can also freeze your funds if they don't like the politics behind your idea. They did it to the Canadian truckers, memorably. So we have $12,000 in our Give, Send, Go. What can you do, Paul? I put it out to our group. In about 3 hours, we had $150,000. I went to conservative influencers I know who are very active on social media, people who have aggregate followings in the millions. They posted it to their accounts. Governor DeSantis retweeted it. We had, by the time I went to bed that night, $700,000 The next day at noon, we hit 1 million. 3 days later, we hit 3 million. I told this story to that university club gathering and said, why did Tom Kenneth, a private attorney here in New York, come to me in Palm Beach and ask me to do this and not to any of you? I actually stood in front of a room of people, so they had no answer, just no response, except this generalized look of shame. And that was a moment at which I realized, no, the future of conservatism is not in our fading northern capitals. It's in Florida, and it's in Palm. The counter-revolution begins in Palm Beach. All right. Thank you. He had one more question that I wanted. I think the ideology now has become so internationalized, and it's so easily communicated through social media and other things that leftists in various countries can find their commonalities in a way that you and I would not necessarily understand or appreciate, but unites them just as conservatism unites us. And the idea growing up as I did in the 1980s that I would be in a formerly communist capital seriously criticizing my own society in a room full of conservatives at a conservative-leaning institute should show you that these directions are in fact possible.
Quick question, Paul. The main event in Florida over the last couple of years was the heavyweight championship fight between Ron DeSantis and Bob Iger of the Disney Corporation. Disney, for our Hungarian audience and our European audience, had a special administrative zone in the middle of Florida around Disney World that was essentially made it a fiefdom of the Walt Disney Corporation. It was in all the papers. The New York Times was obsessed with this story. And then it seems that DeSantis won and Disney slinked away with his tail between its legs. Is that the way that fight finally ended?
They came to a negotiated, as I understand, a negotiated settlement. Disney lost a significant amount of its power in that zone as a result of the confrontation. But there were aspects of what the government was trying to do that were challenged in court. I believe maybe Daniel knows more about this. How favorable were the court settlements in the Disney case to the state? They were very good.
Do you want to comment beyond that, Daniel? Where's the microphone go? Oh, you'll take it to Daniel. Thank you.
I'm asking you because you were the governor's counsel, so you know the peculiarities probably better than anybody.
Yeah, I don't recall the particularities of the settlement agreements because I was not involved in the active litigation, but I know what I know from our attorneys, because we had outside attorneys who litigated for us. But basically we got everything we wanted. Disney just wanted a lot of things, but it wanted to protect its copyright material. It was concerned that the state might interfere in those, affairs and things of that sort. So we got government, back to the Rickety area, now Siftod, and they got, concessions, which I don't think we were going to ever mess with anyway, but they sort of got certain things that they were looking for. But copyright was one of them.
They kept some of their autonomy, which had been that had been given by the state as an incentive to develop Disney World in the 1960s. And one way to say, well, we have, and the issue, of course, was Disney was criticizing state laws about the sexualization of children. And essentially the governor said, well, if you're going to do that, then you're not going to enjoy a special status in Florida anymore. Right? And I think another good effect of that, not only did we largely win what the state wanted to do, Disney actually changed aspects of its programming. And very often we see this with boycotts of other major corporations in America. So kind of politically oriented economic decisions by consumer bases can have a tremendous effect on what happens. And Netflix is a great case. They had a whole staff of people who were hired to produce diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. And their stock price dropped by like 75%, after which they fired all of those people and started doing better content They're still a leftist outfit, and again, they're still being punished for it. The CEO of Netflix just gave a $7 million donation to Kamala Harris, and they had the largest number of subscription cancellations in the history of their company the next days that followed that. So you can do this quite effectively, and I think the Disney case stands out. There were moments where it seemed like the courts would intervene in favor of Disney and against the governor, but I think that it was resolved more favorably in the end.
Well, a final question? Yes.
Yes, George Lawrence, you're calling. I used to run campaigns for congressional people and others in the government. You know, in those days, we'd raise $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. That would run the whole campaign that way. Nowadays, you have to have $2 or $3 million or more than that to run a campaign.
Biden inflation.
And no, it's not. Where I think it's coming from is from the money laundering that's going on, allowable by certain parties in this country, and certain people in this country. How are you going to stop that? Because, you know, here it is, it's our tax dollars circulated around, comes back to Act Blue, and Act Blue distributes it out to the various people inside the Democratic Party. And so we're fighting our own tax dollars all the time, and it's a huge number. Huge number.
Yeah, and I think that's, if you're talking about federal, especially national level campaigns like congressional districts, that's something that has to be addressed at the federal level.
The mayor of New York. Okay.
Well, yeah. And remember that the investigations, I'm no fan of Eric Adams. No, by no means am I a fan of Eric Adams. Eric Adams put up billboards in Florida municipalities a couple of years ago trying to convince former New Yorkers to move back to New York. And all it got him was a laugh. And the major point of the billboards was to say that in New York, you're free to say anything you want to say. The day he announced the billboards, you remember this? A city council attorney in New York asked when the mask mandates in New York City schools would end and was fired from her job. So clearly she couldn't say what she wanted to say, could she? But the campaign finance issue is, I agree, it's a national boondoggle. I think the more important thing is how do we get Republicans to stop donating to Act Blue?
Stop paying your taxes.
Which well, that's another thing, but that's a major problem. And a lot of the election authorities, particularly like I think in Arizona, they caught one of them who was nominally a Republican who had given Act Blue donations. Like so you have to watch out for your own midst to see what's happened. This is my joke. If all Washington D.C. conservatives disappeared tomorrow, the Democrats would lose another 25,000 votes in Virginia.
And on that, would you please join me in thanking our speaker, Dr. Paul Quenoy, for being with us tonight. Thank you for coming. And our next event is, I believe, on October 8th. We're going to have a book launch. And Dr. Kathleen Kaidar-Lynn, who I'm afraid has left us with Helena History Press. It will be a joint event with her organization. So we hope you come and join us for that. Thank you again. Good night.